Top of the middle of the day to you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're at the bench for a narrative session. I'm going to throw the disclaimers out right off the bat. This is going to be probably somewhat long. We're not going to get into too much minutia with technical numbers and that kind of thing. We're going to discuss one particular physical thing in this process and how it relates to mix oil concentration. But check the description for any clarifications and or qualifications. I have a tendency to slammer my speech, which is a word that I made up. It's a combination of slur and stammer. I apologize if I do that in this process. But anyway, we're moving right along. If we're going to talk about mix oil and concentration, which the reason I'm even doing this is I was having a conversation with one of my clients the other day, and we were kind of talking about which concentration I'm running my saws at, which is basically 2%, which is 50 to 1 essentially, or about 50 to 1. I think I probably err on the side of caution and mix things a little bit rich, so I always say 48 to 50 to 1, something like that. If we want to talk about a little bit of a history, I was working in a strip in about 2007, somewhere in there, I guess, after I settled on my mix oil choice before I started blending my own quite a while ago. And I tried different concentrations. It was a long strip. We were in there for several months. I guess long being the ground was long, it was a deep strip. And I tried 40 to 1, 42.5, 45, 47.5. I think you're picking up what I'm laying down, all the way to 60 in the same general time of year, in the same general area. It took a while to get out of that one. So what I found is I thought that the saw ran the best overall in that around 50 to 1 concentration level. I didn't like it at 60 to 1, and I didn't really like it at 40 to 1 either. And I actually last fall, late last summer, whatever, maybe it was, yeah, late last summer, I went ahead and went back to 40 to 1 just because I wanted to try it with my particular blend that I'm using right now, and I found that I didn't like it again, and I didn't even finish the 5-gallon can out before I started diluting it back. So there you go. A little bit of history. So I got on to the fully synthetic mix oil kick back in around 2000, somewhere in there. I had another one of those deep dark holes. We actually had part of the unit was about 400 feet up the other side down in the bottom of the canyon, and so that took quite a while to do that particular job since there was only 2 of us, and it was full manufacture because it was an old growth patch of wood. However, it wasn't super awesome magnum big, but they were pretty nice and tall down in the bottom. But anyway, so I had the opportunity to run a 5-gallon can after 5-gallon can in a similar time of year, in a similar wood type. I tried, I think, probably 12 different choices of mix oil in that session, and everything under the sun basically that I could find in all the motorcycle shops, consistent with the 50 to 1. I actually settled on the Motul off-highway. That's when it was actually a 2T and not an ester core blend. They changed their formulation a little bit about, it's been a while now. I don't remember exactly when that was. It's been quite a few years. They went away from the double ester concept, or I don't have a appropriate container for the Formula K2, which is a triple ester, but anyway, kind of giving a little bit of history. I've been blending my mix oil now for about a year and a half or so. Actually, it's coming up on a couple years. In another few months, it'll be a couple years. So I've managed to get a little bit of time with my blend, taking a few saws apart after putting some miles on them, and I've been pretty well pleased with the results. I think Mr. Speed could probably provide some testament to that. He's seen some pictures of the pistons. If he was to watch this and actually feel the need to chime in, that'd be awesome. But anyway, kind of digress. So back on the concept of a meniscus, since that's the title of the process. Now, how this came to fruition here, was talking to one of my clients, and we were talking about getting the appropriate mix oil concentration. Now, if you get a container that's good for a 5-gallon can, you take the lid off, you dump it in there, you let it drain out for a while, and you're good to go. Sometimes I'm mixing a gallon at a time. Sometimes I'm mixing 2.5 gallons. Sometimes I'm mixing 5. I use a ratio right in my concoctions. Let's say I've done that for a long time. I've had this particular ratio right since before they actually came with the lid on them. I bought this lid as a separate purchase at some later point because I got tired of having a rag stuffed in there on a personal level. So if we look at the side of the container, it has hash marks where your concentrations would be an appropriate level for a 2.5 gallon. There's that says 50 to 1 and that says 24 to 1. And so anyway, I'm mixing different amounts. 50 to 1 for 1 gallon, I'm doing that quite a bit. This is actually 50 to 1 for 5 gallons up here, which is synonymous with about 12.8 ounces of mix oil. 2 ounces, this is fluid ounces on this side, so if I'm running a gallon, I can run 2 ounces of Octane boost. If I'm running 5 gallons, I can run 10 ounces of Octane boost. So we kind of talked about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I try to run around a 98 or so Octane. If we segue off onto the Octane boost concept for a minute, I run this particular brand. I've talked to the tech guy a couple of times in this process. I tried some of the high tests for Maxima. The problem with some of the newer boosts is they can't do the formulation quite the same as what you see in the old choices out there that are grandfathered in, if you will. If we talk about octane numbers versus octane points, I don't know why, for the life of me, some of the octane boosts will say it boosts so many points as opposed to, let's be consistent, boys, it's octane numbers. The octane number on the side of the pump, 91 or 92, depending on where you are for super, premium, whatever. Low grade is 87, 88, whatever it ends up being in your particular location, but I think you're smelling it right now. Anyway, long story short, this is an old formulation. You could not replicate this now if you tried to because you couldn't get this through the EPA regulations. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. This is an old blend, old recipe, if you will. You can't duplicate it at this point in time. I tried this. It seemed to work okay, but I kind of like the toxic waste in a bottle, essentially. Now, this has something called MMT, and I can't read the printing on the side of this container, and I will probably butcher the M of the MMT part of it. Basically, disclaimer contains petroleum distillates and methylcyclopentadienyl, magnesium, that's manganese, and the last one's tricarbonyl, I think. So pretty much butchered that up. but I never said I was a rocket science, now did I? Anyway, long story short, what's important when you're dealing with a boost, for me on a personal level, I want one that's compatible with catalytic converters. I don't want an octane boost with lead. Now, why is that? Chainsaws don't have valves, they don't have seats, they don't have stems, guides, they don't have the need for the lubrication component that is kind of noteworthy with the lead in the process of running a gasoline or whatever. I guess if you're going down a drag, you might be running something other than alcohol, whatever, fuel conceptually. This particular one will work with a catalytic converter and won't harm it. It doesn't contain any lead. I don't need to breathe lead, even less than my saw doesn't need lead for lubrication. So I never recommend running the LL100 avgas to anybody on a personal level. I think I've actually lost business because of that, but I'm okay with that because a person's health is a little bit more important, and I definitely have an opinion, and if somebody asks me, I'm going to tell them, and I'm going to go on record and say I would never run the LL100 in my saws. I don't want to be breathing the lead. You're going to end up breathing the fumes at some point. That's just the way it works for me on a personal level. I'm not saying, however, nobody else should do it. I'm just saying I wouldn't run it and I wouldn't recommend it, and now we know why. So, back on track. If you talk about the directions, it treats up to 16 gallons. Okay. Some of the disclaimer thing. This is a 16 fluid ounce container. This treats 16 gallons. So the premise is there's a certain amount of octane points you're going to get, which that's the alternate one. It's actually octane numbers, the 97 number, 98, whatever it is that I end up the end result in my mix on a personal level. Octane points, there'll be 10 octane points, so you get 30 octane points, and it's a 10-to-1 ratio. 10 octane points is 1 octane number, essentially. This particular boost yields, I think it's 3 to 4 essentially. So per ounce per gallon, you're going to get an increase of 3 to 4 octane numbers. So if you put this in a 1-gallon container, 1 fluid ounce of this particular octane boost, you should see, if you start out at 91, you should see 94 or 95 octane as a result in the end. So a couple ounces gives you around 98 octane, I guess, was what I'm trying to say. So that's something to think about. You'd actually probably have to call the company, talk to the tech guy, and find out what they really say, because I've looked at some of these octane boost bottles and it's nebulous, let's just say that, how much of an increase you get on some of them. Okay, back on track. Now that we've covered all the history and the segues, which I can't guarantee there won't be one or more of those as thoughts pop into my smaller than average size cranium, the premise of this whole video is the meniscus. That's spelled M-E-N-I-S-C-U-S. Now, that's going to be the thin band that's on the very upper portion of the liquid mix oil in the container, and it has to do with the surface tension band, essentially. We're going to look at that a little bit closer. Now, we got to talk a little bit about physics in a container of liquid. There's a certain amount of attraction that liquid has in a container to itself. That's called cohesion. And there's a certain amount of traction that a liquid will have in a container to the container itself. That's called adhesion. Now, there is a coefficient of adhesion. It applies a lot to the traction situation of, let's say, tires to the road in the physics world. There's some of it has to do with what's going on in dealing with the electricity. We're not talking about that necessarily. We're talking about the adhesion component to the container itself, but we have to talk about the surface tension for a minute just to get that out of the way. So if you have a bunch of molecules of whatever liquid in here, water has a pretty good negative charge. Formula K2, for example, is negatively charged as well. They do that on purpose so it'll be attracted to the metal, as far as I can tell anyway. But if we want to talk about the liquid itself, so the liquid in the center is attracted to the other molecules in the container. I'm thinking you're understanding what I'm saying. When we get to the top, the molecules at the surface don't have anything to be attracted to, any molecules of the like compound. So their attraction's looking like this. So I'm digressing for a second, but we're talking about surface tension. And because the molecules at the top aren't being pulled in another direction from the molecules above them, like these ones would be down in the center of the container, there's a stronger bond with the molecules at the top, essentially. And so that's why you could, spiders or whatever, you water skippers, they go across the top of the water itself. They're working off of that surface tension concept. You can put something in here that's heavier, basically more dense than water, and it should sink, but as long as it doesn't break that plane, it won't actually sink because the surface tension is stronger than the gravity that's pulling on whatever it is that you put on here. Now, we're not talking about you can throw a rock in there. We're talking about something that has a fairly decent amount of surface area and was more dense than whatever liquid you put in here. It doesn't matter what the liquid is. As long as the density is higher, it will sink once it breaks that plane of the very top layer of the liquid. Okay, so we kind of went down that road a little bit. So if we talk about the ratio right container, and forgive my rudimentary drawings and stuff, but it's graduated on the side. We looked at that earlier. Essentially, if we want to talk about the adhesion component, you pour your mix oil in here, and let's say this is 50-to-1, this one right here. We'll just, it doesn't matter just for the sake of argument. Here's 50-to-1. As you fill this container, the ratio right, with the liquid, what's going to happen is that surface tension is going to form that very top layer, but you're going to get some adhesion on the side of the container with the mix oil. And essentially that thin band on the top is going to have, we're exaggerating, is going to have a concave shape to it. So this band is called the meniscus, essentially. And you can't really tell looking down in it so much as you can looking at it from the side. Now, what you have to be careful of is where you're reading the meniscus, this band, in the container. Because if you read it like this, where the meniscus comes in underneath the bulk of it, where the top of the line on the outside edge, because the liquid adheres to the container and it actually raises up on the side a little bit. Both sides will be equal. The problem becomes reading the meniscus appropriately or correctly. You actually are looking at it down here. It's not going to have the right amount of mix oil in your container if you read it at the outside upper edge. So if we look at it again, say now we're, just for the sake of argument, we're going to mix it at 40-to-1, for example, just for the sake of argument. We want the line that goes across between here, we want the meniscus the bottom of the meniscus to just kiss that line across there. Now you're looking through the container, which this one's starting to get, you can see it pretty good still. It's a petroleum-based plastic, so it's stained, essentially. The oil has permeated a little bit, and so it's a little bit colored, but you can still see the graduations on the side. But anyway, back on track, you want the bottom of that band to be at the line or the top of the line, not the top of that band. It's the bottom of the band, which is important to have equal with your line to get the appropriate concentration. Now, me on a personal level, I tend to run, like I said, 48 to 50 to 1. I run a little extra mix oil because I'm adding a little bit of boost to the process. However, if you want to consider 128 ounces and adding 2 more, 128 ounces is fluid ounces, that equals a gallon of liquid essentially. You're not really changing it appreciably, but like I said, I run it a little bit rich just for the sake of argument. So after having that conversation with that gentleman and talking about the concept of the meniscus, I thought, well, maybe there might be somebody out there that really was using a ratio right, but maybe they weren't actually mixing it to where they thought, because if you don't take into consideration the shape of that upper band, which is called the meniscus, then you're not actually getting your concentration correct. And I'm pretty anal about stuff, actually, and so I want it to be in a certain place, and I make sure to take care of that knowingly, not random, haphazard. So the other thing I think I need to throw out there in this conversation is when you change your mix oil concentration in any measurement of liquid, say a gallon, since we've been working with that measurement or that amount of liquid essentially, the more or less oil you add to that gallon, if it is exactly a gallon every time, let's say 40, 45, 50, 55 and a half, 60, there will be less or more molecules of fuel in any amount of liquid when the concentration of oil changes. Now, the difference in oil concentration between 40 to 1 and 50 to 1 isn't necessarily huge. I understand that part of the equation. However, I guess just something to throw it out there so it's understood. I don't know, trivia maybe? At 40 to 1, there are more oil molecules and less fuel molecules in a gallon than there are at 50 to 1. There are more molecules of oil and less molecules of fuel at 50 to 1 than 60 to 1. So there is a little bit of a difference in the way the mix oil and gas, the combination, is going to burn based on the fact that there are more or less oil molecules and or more or less fuel molecules in a certain amount of volume based on the fact that we can get it at a gallon every time. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because, I don't know, I thought it was interesting when I first heard about it. Like, oh, that's been a long time ago now, but sometimes it's just nice to, I don't know, try to help people out. I guess that's the whole purpose of this process, is try to help people out and understand. I've been on the synthetic kick. I think I said that for a long time. It's been 20 years at least. I did run some pretty good petroleum-based mix oils. Aerolube is one of those. I don't even know if that's an oil that's made anymore. McCulloch, they had a pretty good petroleum-based mix oil as well years ago. I have an old bottle of Home Light, actually. And just, I haven't really used any, just for the kicks, some Craftsman, fully synthetic. I've been afraid to try it in all actuality, but I kind of have a little bit of a collection here and there of some different kinds of oils. If we want to get back on the Octane boost just for a second as we're wrapping it up, because I thought about this and I was late in the process. If you want to get toxic waste technically in a bottle, this is the one for sure. And it talks about effective up to 6 full octane numbers, in parentheses 60 points. So that's that 10-to-1 kind of a concept. Blended with nitromethane. Again, this is one of those versions that you can't actually go make today, a formulation that would be relatively close to this. It contains the MMT that I butchered up earlier as well. This stuff actually does a really good job, but you can tell when you smell it that there's something happening in there. So the reason I brought this up is because this one has a variance of treating, it says 45 to 60 liters. So you kind of have to understand that concept in the Octane Boost world, what you're actually purchasing based on what the premise is for getting that increase in the octane numbers. I guess that's the end result in understanding if you're going to run boost, what is it that I'm actually getting, because some of them don't really clue a guy in on the label what you're going to actually realize unless they talk about how much they're good for. So if it's up to, you're going to mix it at the lowest amount, the 45 liters, and this much, this is 473 milliliters, so I think it's about 12 ounces or something. I don't remember now. If we compare, oh no, it's 16 because they're the same. 16 is 473 milliliters. So it's 16 ounces in here, and you're going to get maximum effectiveness at the lowest number that they have printed, up to 6 octane numbers. So kind of thought maybe I'd throw that out there just for a little tidbit. So we want to wrap it up. Hopefully this was informative and enjoyable. It was probably longer and more tedious than a guy wanted to participate in. I think about things as we're going through, segue off a little bit about some of the history. The maximum testing out of the different mix oil saga, that happened about 20 years ago essentially, and I've periodically gone back here and there and tried various choices to see if there's any appreciable difference. I did a bunch of that again in 2016. I ran a couple gallons a day through my 064. Some of the videos are actually on the YouTube channel. Risky is one of those. It was kind of back in testing some different mix oils. I'd run 1 gallon of one particular brand maybe in the morning, and then one particular brand maybe in the afternoon. It could have been, I did run some of the K2 back then, but I don't have one of those bottles, unfortunately. I do apologize. But anyway, hopefully this was informative, interesting, enjoyable, noteworthy, whatever. I'm thankful that you took the time to stop by and check it out. I'm thankful that you're just listening to what I have to say in this process, with the idea that hopefully somebody actually gleaned a little bit of information and they understand how you need to measure your liquid mix oil out in a container like this, and do it appropriately, I guess, essentially. So thanks for watching this session. Have a blessed day wherever you might be on God's green earth.